So hello, everyone. My name is Julia Rooney. I'm the marketing and content specialist for your BBB serving Southern Alberta and East Kootenay. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending where you are. Before we get started, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. You may have noticed when you entered that it was letting you know we are recording today's session. And please use the chat button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions throughout the event, or if you feel comfortable enough to unmute yourself during the Q&A, please do so, and there will be time for Q&A at the end. So your BBB has partnered with Canadian Association of Movers and Highland Moving and Storage to have a discussion on how to move, what to watch for when moving, top 10 things to look for pertaining to the moving industry, and consumer awareness. Before we jump in, I'd like to just do a very quick intro of our panelists today. I'm just going to read my screen here. So Mary O'Sullivan Anderson is the president and CEO of BBB serving Southern Alberta and East Kootenay. Just a quick thing about BBB. For more than 100 years, Better Business Bureau has been helping people find trustworthy businesses and charities. BBB is a nonprofit, business-supported organization that sets and upholds high standards for fair and honest business behavior. And visit bbb.org for more information and to look for movers you can trust. Nancy Irvine is the president of Canadian Association of Movers, also known as CAM. CAM is Canada's only moving industry trade association, and it's working hard to ensure that consumers receive quality professional services by setting ethical standards, using trained staff and equipment, and being attentive to consumer needs and existing legislation. CAM is identifying rogue movers that are cheating and abusing Canadian consumers and helping consumers find trusted, reputable movers. And Liam McQuillan, hopefully I said that right, is the general manager of Highland Moving and Storage. They have offices locally here in Calgary, and they are across Canada as well. So yeah, without further ado, we're excited to have the three of them join us today for this panel, and I'll throw it over to Mary to get started.
Fantastic, awesome. Thank you for that, Julia, and thank you for that land acknowledgement. We do recognize that Julia and I are both in Southern Alberta, but we do recognize the across Canada for sure. So thank you for that. So yeah, as Julia mentioned, throughout the month of May, we recognize the moving industry. What we know is that we continue to see increases in volumes of complaints and inquiries. And with the real estate market being as hot as it is right now across Canada, we want to make sure that we are having a conversation that's going to help consumers know the best steps to plan a safe and trouble-free move. So I'm excited to be here with Nancy and Liam. Thank you both for joining me. This is going to be very interactive, as Julia said. If you want to pop a question in the chat, if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that as well. Nancy, why don't we start with you? As president of Canadian Association of Movers, what have you seen this past year in terms of volumes, complaints, or inquiries in this industry?
It's been crazy busy. We've had an increase in close to 300%. 300,000, can you imagine? 300% in complaints since June of 2020. So it has increased every month. It gets more and more and more as more of these rogue movers get into the game because they're seeing that they can get away with things. So unfortunately, most of the people that get in touch with us are getting in touch with us afterwards. So hopefully the folks that are on this today, and welcome, you're going to know ahead of time to be able to say, wait a minute, I can keep myself from having this happen. But the other positive side of this is we've also had a huge increase in inquiries about moving companies, the good, the bad, and the ugly ones. And that's because the messaging is finally getting out there about doing your research. So that's wonderful. So we've gone from about 4 calls a day to 10 calls a day, which is a lot.
It is a lot. And, you know, the inquiries are good because it means that people are taking the extra steps to research, be informed, and educate themselves on the process. And the fact is the process is different for each move that you do. Liam, maybe I'll shift over to you just for a moment. As General Manager of Highland Moving, of course, you oversee local, long distance, and international moving. So when choosing a mover, what do consumers need to know, whether it be a local move or a long distance move across Canada?
Well, I mean, I think the main thing is to really make sure to take the time and to do some research into all of your options. Certainly a local move, as you mentioned, has a lot of different kind of steps than a long distance move. Local movers could be part of a van line, they could be independent. There are, good apples in both basket. The same with long distance moving. The trick is to really make sure, make sure they're a member of CAM, check their Better Business Bureau rating, maybe check some online reviews. Take that with a grain of salt. I mean, there's certainly some unscrupulous movers who will, post fake reviews, have 700 reviews with a perfect 5 kind of thing. But certainly, I think the real thing is to just take the time. You're moving your entire life's possessions. It's an important thing and should be treated as such.
Yeah, that's perfect, Liam. And, when we talk about, some of the road movers, one of the things that we used to educate on is look out for unmarked vans. We want to make sure that we have company equipment. The fact of the matter is, with some supply chain issues and the increase in market, that's not always possible. You don't always have a truck that says Highland Moving and the big billboard on the side. So is there a concern if a mover is not using company equipment? Is there anything that they can do on the education on that side?
No, that's an excellent question and very, very fair. Right now, we have serious equipment issues in our business, in the industry, I should say. It's not always, you're right, that you're going to get a marked van, especially a trailer on a long distance move. You may well have a very reputable mover show up with, an unmarked lease trailer kind of thing. I think what you want to be sure of is that, you've got the people that you're expecting, they're in uniform, maybe check with the office if there is some sort of concern that, oh, hey, I've got an unmarked van or a Penske truck or something of that nature, and make sure that it's simply just a matter of, unmarked equipment rather than the wrong people.
Yeah, that's really good. And, obviously we've talked a lot over the last few months about supply chain and labor issues. This clearly must be impacting this industry. Here we are, we're the middle of May, we're hearing about houses selling immediately. That obviously is affecting you as well. What kind of advice can you give for consumers in terms of how far out should they be booking and planning to make sure that they have a reputable company on their door?
Well, I would say really, especially coming into kind of the peak moving season here, as soon as possible. With the housing market, a big challenge that we've been having is people having their homes sold right away. So last minute bookings, but more than that is storage issues. If the home has sold, perhaps they're not able to get into the new place, perhaps they haven't found a new place. So those are definitely things you want to, if you're able to kind of plan ahead for, whether it's using the mover's storage or, obviously there's plenty of self-storage options, certainly, container storage, that sort of thing. But that's definitely something to look forward to. And then in terms of the supply chain, a big issue has been overseas moving for that. There is a giant container shortage. It's been very, very difficult to book sailing times. So that's something people are going to want to consider as well if they are moving overseas or expecting a ship to Canada, that they may be looking at some extended time for that sort of thing.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Liam. Nancy, maybe I'll just switch over to you here for a moment. Building on sort of these labor and supply issues, one of the things that we did see a lot of that really through the pandemic really increased is the moving to virtual surveys rather than in-home surveys and having a moving consultant come out and do an estimate. With the switch to online surveys, do you see more of an issue? Is this adding any additional stress or issues up front in this with planning a move?
Sure. Well, virtual surveys have been a godsend during COVID because they capture the essence of the move. So you can see what's in a room, how it's set up, how narrow the staircases might be, the general amount of furniture, that kind of thing. But it's important when you're doing those types of surveys that the closets get open, the drawers in the china cabinets get open, so you can see what's inside, like kitchen cupboards especially, because you never know what treasure troves are back there.
Right.
And it could really have an effect on your weight. But you also need to be able to peek into the attic, and we need to go into the garage, we need to look at the tool shed, all those kinds of things. So it's a great second best option. I always believe that going in first person is the best, because then you get to actually see what is important. Like if you're stopping to talk to me about this console that you have and you're talking about it lovingly, I'm going to pick up that that's a really important piece for you, and I'm going to make a note to say, hey, this has to be treated very specially. So those kinds of things are great, but it doesn't matter if it's virtual or in person. You have to have the mover have a look at what you've got. Don't just let somebody say, oh no, it's not important. It's worth the 5 minutes, even if it's just a small little teeny tiny apartment, just to have a quick boo around.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because we don't even realize how much there is to move. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not professional movers. And what where we might have been able to, get a couple of buddies over with a pizza, moving has changed a lot, and the size of our homes have changed. And so it does require that professionalism. And you raised a couple of good points that I just wanted to circle back on. So one, on the actual estimate itself, what is the responsibility for the mover and the consumer when a weight and an estimate is given? What type of guarantee do they have, the consumer, that it won't exceed the weight or the price?
Well, by law, or by the few regulations that do exist in our world, the estimate can't go, the actual charges shouldn't be more than 110%, so 10% more. So it is absolutely critical on the mover's side that they get that estimate right. And there's some tricky wording that some of the scammers are using, that if you haven't told them everything that was going, and you've added even a book, then that could literally cancel out the estimate, and they can charge whatever they want to do. So when you go with a professional moving company like Liam's or any of them, they're going to have someone come. And I mean, I was pretty darn good at estimating, and I was quite proud of myself. I'm sure Liam's the same. Like you get really good at it, and then we can give you an estimate with a fairly accurate weight, and that's the critical thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, because it's important that consumers recognize that it's not only about the actual quote, the estimate, which is obviously critically important, but it's also the mover's ability to know what size of equipment to send out. And there's a whole host of issues that can happen if they don't have the right equipment. And that's, I think, where a lot of times we see some of those complaints or some of those stories that a move might not start out to be unscrupulous, but sometimes the situation sort of builds and leaves it in a difficult situation for the both of them. So really important to be able to do that process. And I suppose from the consumer point of view, making sure that you're clear on what your role and responsibility is if the scope of work changes, making sure that you're communicating that with the mover is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you say, oh, I'm not going to bother taking the appliances, and then your house gets sold immediately and they don't want them because they want all new stuff, then you're going to take them. You have to let the mover know, because
Right.
if you don't, I mean, if it's just an extra box, unless it's, a box of anvils or something, you got to let the mover know, or that null and voids the contract you have with them, and you have problems exist out of that. So
yeah, and that's a really good point.
It always comes down to communication, always.
Always. And I mean, we
Yep.
see that excuse me, obviously from a BBB perspective, you know, when marketplace disputes happen, it oftentimes does come down to that front end communication. So I'm glad you bring that up. Liam, Nancy was talking about when you're able to go into the home and do a survey and make note of the fact that, you know, there are items that are quite sentimental. It brings us to the next point, which is really about insurance or replacement value protection. What do consumers need to know on that? Whether it's insurance on their goods, their actual belongings that they're moving, or also what is the insurance on, you know, their house, the hardwood floors, anything that might be damaged inside the house. Could you maybe speak to that, Liam?
I could, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I would preface it by saying that movers are not insurance sellers.
Right.
So that the term that we use generally is replacement value protection on your goods. By law in Canada, a commercial carrier is required to provide a minimum of 60 cents per pound of coverage for each item. You'll often find that certainly reputable movers will have options for elevating that coverage at a charge, of course, but essentially to cover the full value of the goods, whether it be to repair a piece that may have been damaged if possible, or to replace it. In terms of protection for the home, that is also covered. So if a mover is coming in and, you know, damages a wall or a banister, or, you know, a hardwood floor, certainly that would be on the mover to provide coverage for. Certainly in our instance, any damage to the home is covered regardless of the choice on replacement value protection. So if a customer chooses to send their goods at a released rate, so that 60 cents a pound that I mentioned, the home would be covered nonetheless.
Thank you for that, Liam. So is it safe to assume then that if I have a professional mover into my home, will you do a bit of a walkthrough of my residence to identify, you know, if I already have a big gouge on my hardwood floors? Will your crew do a little bit of that? Yeah.
Absolutely, and it goes kind of hand in hand with what Nancy was saying, that it's, you know, that front end communication that's really important. That's why it's so important to, you know, make sure the survey is done. It's not just for you know, changes in the scope of the move, but things exactly like this that can be addressed before you know, we get into a situation where you know, things could start to turn south.
Yeah, and speaking of things turning south, I think that's just it though. I mean, well, the moving process itself, and by that I mean actually just physically putting it in the truck and driving it to a new destination, that is really only one small part of professional moving services. It's all the other, the estimating, the quoting, the preparing the residents, educating the consumer on the replacement value protection. I guess that's really the difference between hiring reputable movers and hiring someone who can simply move the items. Is that fair to say?
I think absolutely. There's just so much more that goes into executing a move, you know, as it's supposed to be done, than just simply, as you say, yeah, picking the stuff up and putting it down in the truck. There's everything. You know, there are instances certainly in moving where things do happen. There is perhaps damage to an item or the home, and you know, that's really on the mover to, you know, to fix, to make sure things end up the way that they're supposed to. The move isn't done when the truck drives away, really. It's done when the customer is settled in their new home and happy with the way things have gone.
Yeah, and you know, we do hear those horror stories, don't we? We hear those horror stories where a mover has driven away, all of your goods are in their truck, and then they're phoning you and basically holding the goods hostage and demanding additional costs. Nancy, can you maybe speak to, I know you specifically have talked about that quite a bit, about educating the consumers and the public on that. Can you maybe speak to maybe some of the complaints or some of the issues around that?
Yeah, the sheer amount of it is just mind blowing. I think that there are people out there that just, they think like this. I don't think like this at all. So, but it has a lot to do with, you know, oh, well, I had such a low quote from them and I thought they were great. So I booked with them, and then they have all their things, and then that's what happens. They go away. They tell you that you owe them $1,000 to $3,000 more, and it can go up to 20. I mean, we've got a woman that it was $20,000 more, which is insane. So that's the big thing. And I mean, calling us then, or you then, doesn't really, there's not a whole lot we can do. We can get pro bono legal services involved, but the court system, the court was at the beginning of COVID, the court was about 5 weeks. It's now about 7 months to get a moving claim through small claims court, and that's with lawyers or pro bono legal services or whatever. So it's crazy, and it's putting such a huge blemish on the reputable movers, because there's thousands and thousands of fantastic, honorable moving companies that have been in the business for generations. Like we're talking 3, 4, 5 generations, horse and buggy things back in the 1800s. So it's heartbreaking that it's happening.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, just the generations of movers and within that industry. You know, I've often said that when you look at hiring a mover, you get professional services for your realtor, for your lawyer, all of the other aspects of it. And it's definitely worthwhile to take that time in your moving services as well. You know, we want to make sure that we're not scaring people away from moving at the same time. And so a lot of this conversation can be really heavy because it can seem really scary. But I want to shift a little bit to maybe some of the stuff that we can be doing on the front end proactively, really some really, you know, basic steps that we can do that somebody who's undergoing a move might not think of doing. Can you run us through some of those, Nancy? And then Liam, I'll also ask the same of you.
Sure.
I'll try not and step on what Liam may talk about. So, well, I mean, I'm a one-trick pony. Do your research. You know, every day we have movers contacting us, or we'll have a consumer contacting us about XYZ mover. And the first place I go, well, we check our database to see if we have anything on them. But the first place we go is to you, and that's not to pump you guys up. It's just, you have such an amazing database that shows their complaints, their history, their recommendations, their everything. So, I mean, that's critical. And don't take the testimonials that people have on their websites as being real, because you can buy for $75, you can buy 100 testimonials from, you know, somewhere in outer space, because we've been asked if we want to have that service, and it's crazy. So that's the big thing. I was gonna, you blew my thunder. I was gonna say about, you know, professional services, and why wouldn't you? That's my big thing. But, you know, get 3 quotes in writing and make sure they're from different sources. Don't always have them like from the internet, because if you do an internet quote, you're likely going to get 5 very similar emails with similar pricing. So you want to come to CAM and get some, get some of your neighborhood movers. Look, all you're doing is asking them. Liam would love to give you a quote, and it doesn't mean that you have to go with them. It just helps to, you know, make sure that you're getting an honest price.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to stop because I know I'm going to say, I know I'm going to get into Liam's stuff. So.
No, that's perfect. So making sure that you're getting quotes, getting it in writing, and choosing reputable movers by doing the right research. Liam, anything that you can add to it? I'm sure that there is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the quotes thing, I think, is really, you know, is really the big one, to make sure you're able to see what various providers might be offering in terms of pricing, but as well as servicing, valuation, that sort of thing. I'm certainly a big proponent of getting somebody on the phone. I think there's a lot of value in actually speaking to somebody rather than, you know, simply firing off a couple of emails back and forth, or, you know, using an online quote generator, as Nancy kind of mentioned, that sort of thing. It also helps with making sure that the quote that you're receiving is accurate for the service you're looking for. You know, whether it includes the packing of your items into cartons or just simply the moving, placement, value protection, that sort of thing, all things that you want to make sure you discuss prior to, you know, really sitting down to look at your quotes. A physical location is a big thing as well. to make sure that you're dealing with somebody that has, their equipment, their crews, that sort of thing, rather than is just taking your phone call, email, whatever, and selling the move to, a third party operator kind of thing that, you may have no recourse then if things do not end up the way you want them to. And then I think, as Nancy said, it's really about doing research. Talk to friends. Word of mouth is pretty accurate in a lot of ways. Maybe you've got friends, families, members that have moved recently. It's really making sure you take your time to hire the right provider.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And it's hard to take your time. I mean, I know with the real estate, we got to act on this now. It's hard. And so what is it, a pound of prevention, however the saying goes, but that's really valuable, Liam. So I am hearing that some of the movers are already booked up for summer and they're not able to secure a mover. So if they phone you, Liam, for example, if they phone you and you're already booked up, are moving companies able to give referrals as well or recommendations on where to go, or what's their best if they can't get a move, somebody like you?
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to provide that. It's not a matter of, trying to keep everything for ourselves. As Nancy mentioned, there are lots of very, very good movers.
Yeah.
We generally know each other. Certainly the reputable ones have perhaps worked with each other before, but I'm certainly happy to point people in the right direction if we're not able to accommodate their dates or are simply looking for a service that perhaps somebody is just more suited to offer.
That's perfect. Thank you for that. One thing I wanted to touch on, and then Julia, maybe we'll take a look and see if there's any questions that have come in on the chat. But I wanted to ask about deposits because it's something that does come up. We recognize that oftentimes movers are asking consumers to pay a deposit to secure the moving date. What is sort of the industry norm? How much should you be putting for a deposit, and what are some red flags around that?
Nancy, answer?
Either one of you. Yeah, sure.
Well, I'll start because this has come up in the last couple of weeks, even amongst our members, because in the past, our members have not been, asking for deposits because you've entered into a contract with them and they don't need to have deposits necessarily. However, what's been happening over the last year or so, because it's really hard to get a company. I've just had a discussion the other day, the customers are booking with, 5 or 6 movers and then not telling the 4 movers or 5 movers that they didn't choose who they're going with. And then what they're finding out is that, the day before when the mover calls to confirm everything, oh no, we're not going with you. We're going with XYZ. Then you've already got your labor reassigned and they may be coming in on the weekend and, it just creates a whole bunch of, you've got trucks changed depending on the size of the move and all that. So some of our members are contemplating putting down maybe an hour of deposit for an hour of their time, just to confirm that, yes, you are going and you're not like just a tire kicker, just booking with anybody kind of thing. So that's just kind of to help protect, because I mean, the mover's still on the hook for labor and, bringing people into the office and all that. Now, scam movers they're going to look for, a lot of cases it's $500, $1,000, something like that, half of the price of the move. So it gets kind of confusing if you've got a small move that's only going to be about $1,000 or whatever, and they're charging this, $200 or $300, which might be the same as an hourly move rate deposit for a professional moving company. But basically, get it all in writing. Get this all ahead of time and communicate so that you understand what's going on. But if you're getting asked for $500, especially if it's cash, like run in the other direction.
Yeah, we tend to say if it's a cash deposit, obviously that would be a pretty big red flag.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so go ahead. Sorry, Nancy.
I was going to say, and Liam may have a different view on it. This because this literally has only come up in the last couple of weeks for at the CAM office.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly do look for a deposit, but generally in kind of the scope of the move, it's a nominal fee, essentially to cover, administrative costs, or in the case of a local move, if, as Nancy mentioned, perhaps something happened and we have to turn the crew around. I've heard recently, which I thought was a very, very good idea and totally reasonable to me, is on a local move, to just simply take the travel time as a deposit. And then, your billable time would then start, when the crew arrives at residence. That seemed to me a very good idea, actually, something that I'll consider. But yeah, certainly if they're looking for a large portion of what the total cost of the move would be upfront, that would be something that I would suggest is probably a red flag. As I mentioned, it's generally a nominal fee just to cover administrative costs, and no more than that up front. And then further, to Nancy's point, it's really about discussing payment terms and knowing exactly when funds are due, when you can expect the invoice, that sort of thing ahead of time, because that should never change.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point is, deposits in and of itself, like unmarked trucks, while it used to be a red flag, not necessarily as much of a red flag now, but making sure that you're understanding exactly what it is, method of payment, and refrain from paying any cash, as you both said. So thank you for that. There is a question that has come in here. So either Liam or Nancy, if you are booking a move, say between two cities within a province, should you book the mover based in the old location or a new city? That's a great question.
Yep, that is a good question. I would say that in the cases of certainly van line based companies, it could be either. Certainly long distance moves generally have van line affiliated offices in many centers, and it's not uncommon to receive a call from somebody moving into Calgary, for instance, from Ontario or Edmonton, whatever the case may be, and being able to provide that service. I think it's really just a matter of kind of making those calls and see who you feel most comfortable with. One thing you might want to consider is if you are booking with somebody in your destination city, who's going to service that move? Is it going to be is it going to be a truck coming up from Calgary to Edmonton to pick up your goods? Is it going to be somebody based in Edmonton with whom they have a partnership? That would be something to perhaps consider, or at least have a discussion around. One way is not better than the other, I don't think, but again, it's a consideration.
And if I can just add to that quickly, so
Please.
if you're going with what we would call an independent mover, which is someone who is not affiliated with a van line like United, Atlas, Allied, one of the big van lines, you've got to check to see how they're going to charge you, because if they may charge you by the hour and include mileage, whereas technically they should be charging you by weight and distance, because it is a long distance move. So it does get a little, if you're just moving, say from, I have to use an Ontario or Nova Scotia or something. I don't know Alberta that well, but like if you're just moving from Hamilton to Toronto and it's an hour drive, that can be done by the hour. But if you're getting into 2, 3, 4 hours, it should be considered a long distance move, and the truck should be weighed. So just be very careful on what the conditions that they're thinking of charging you for that.
Yeah, and it really goes back to the getting it all in writing and the quotes, and making sure that when you're getting those estimates, that it's really an apples to apples comparison. So if one estimate is really detailing how that's going to be handled, just make sure that you're asking those questions as well. So thank you both for that. Another question that's come in: are you aware of any changes to regulations for the moving industry, specifically provincially or federally, given that the industry is so prone to scammers in recent years? Nancy, I think this is probably a great question for you.
This is me. Yeah. Nope. There's nothing.
Mhm.
We're working on it. It's so frustrating. Right now, we're just trying to get law enforcement to at least charge people, these moving companies, with extortion or theft or anything. So we're taking it out of, we're trying to move it into consumer protection so that we have some hope that we might get some kind of convictions, because they are definitely breaking consumer protection rules. But it's like beating your head against a cement wall. It really is. We've come a long way where there's actually now convictions, but these guys are still out running. They just changed their name. They've got 5 new names this year already, and they're just out doing their thing. And it's frustrating and maddening. So we're working on it, but it'll take years, because we also then, once we get all the evidence together, then we have to go and try to get the police involved or law enforcement involved, and then go to government. And, you know, it depends on the flavor of the day at the government too, what's important to them.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, all the more reason really, excuse me, why we put time and resources and focus into May Moving Month. As an unregulated industry, we want to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. So, you know, moving is about moving lives, creating memories. We want to make sure that we're creating good memories. We know that there's a lot of inherent risks with it. We want to make sure that we're keeping you informed. Nancy, you talk about reviews earlier. Of course, at bbb.org, all of our reviews, complaints, they're all substantiated to make sure that a transaction or an interaction has taken place. So you know that you can trust any of the information at bbb.org. Canadian Association of Movers obviously does a lot of screening with their members as well, in order to continuously raise the bar within the industry and make sure that we're having some good outcomes. And then, of course, movers like Liam and others are really dedicated to really being professional movers and offering a service that is so necessary and so needed. This has been such a great discussion, Nancy and Liam. I appreciate just your knowledge on this industry and your commitment to making sure that you are keeping consumers safe, and that you are educating the industry on, you know, how to also protect themselves as they move forward throughout this season as well. Liam, Nancy, I'll just ask if there's anything else maybe that you wanted to make sure that we covered that we didn't touch on before we wrap up today. Nancy, maybe we'll start with you.
I just want to say that at the end of the move, now that it's safe, you want to be able to hug your guys that have moved you. You want to be so happy. You've spent the day with them. They've helped you through a very traumatic time, because moving is super stressful. I've done it 25 times. It's awful. And, you know, you just want to be able to hug these guys and just say, hey, this is just the best thing ever. So that's my advice. Go with your gut. If you're not feeling like you're going to want to hug them, maybe you should look for another company.
Excellent. Thanks, Nancy. Liam?
I would just kind of further add that, you know, trust plays a huge part in it. And you need to find somebody that you trust, somebody that'll answer your call, no matter how many times you're calling. If you have questions, your provider should want to help you through this process. Really, at the end of the day, while we're, you know, technical and professional movers, it's a customer service industry, and the customer is the most important person in the move. They should be the ones where all the attention is focused, and a provider should be happy to do so.
Liam, I love that. The customer is very important in the move, and I love that you really have that customer-centric focus. So thank you for that. Julia, I don't know if there's any other questions that might have come into you directly. It looks like the chat is clear.
There was one question, but I think Nancy had kind of covered it. It was just if there's a need to regulate the moving industry across Canada.
Yes, there is. And we'll just leave it at that. We're working on it.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for that, Julia.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, Nancy, Liam, thank you so much for your time, for the commitment that you make, and really making sure that we are keeping consumers safe, that we're creating some great memories. So as Nancy said, you feel like comfortable enough to hug your mover at the end of the day. You know, we want to make sure that we are providing that information on the front end. So do your research. Make sure you're checking them out at bbb.org, using a Canadian Association of Movers as a resource, as well as part of your research, and make sure that you're staying safe this moving season. So thank you very much for attending today. If you had any questions that you didn't get covered today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you are moving this month, I wish you a very safe move and a great summer. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.